All right, welcome again to today's training on construction BMPs. Thank you for coming today. My name is Leon Gomez. I'm a senior project manager with Harrison Associates, also the city engineer for Sand City up here on the Monterey Peninsula, and I am the chair of the Monterey Regional Stormwater Management Program. This is Stormwater Awareness Week. For those of you who aren't aware, it's September 25th through the 29th, and there's a series of educational training, informational training, and activities this whole week, of which this BMP training is one of those activities. I wanted to take a moment just to give thanks to everybody that helped put this great training on and the lunch that you have before you. Certainly to Monterey Water for IT support and training support. Thank you, Rachel. Everybody give it up for Rachel. And the IT team over here working hard to keep this going. Big thanks to the city of Seaside for use of the Oldemeyer Center. Thank you, Patrick and Billy and everybody else in Seaside. Thank you to Save the Whales, Maris, for your support, sign-in sheet, organizing. Thank you to the individual Monterey Regional Stormwater Program members for bringing their building officials and inspectors out here to this great training. And thank you to my co-chair, Ron, for your support. And last but not least, thank you to Mr. T for the awesome barbecue food. Can we give it up? Can we give it up for Mr. T? Really quickly, for those of you who may or may not know, the Monterey Regional Stormwater Program was started in the early 2000s as a collective effort by 7 cities on the peninsula. That's the city of Carmel, city of Pacific Grove, county of Monterey, city of Del Rio, city of Sand City, city of Monterey, to meet certain NPDES stormwater regulations and requirements that all of our agencies on the peninsula and within the county are subject to. Our group meets once a month, usually the 4th Wednesday of every month, and we do our best to comply and help our agencies comply with those permit requirements. And our website is the montereyc.org. I think it's listed at the beginning and on the slide. We have a lot of resources there related to stormwater, construction, design, tips for businesses. You can even report a spill on the Monterey Sea website. I'd like to do a brief introduction for the presenters of today's training. WGR Southwest has been a Northern California industry leader in stormwater for over 20 years, providing consultation for anyone trying to successfully navigate the state's construction-related stormwater regulations. WGR can provide clients with documents, training, and oversight needed to successfully implement stormwater requirements and construction general permit requirements or construction site BMPs. Mike and Matt Lewis both have previous backgrounds in the construction industry and have together worked with WGR for almost 15 years, and both are qualified SWEP practitioners. So let's give a hand for our presenters today, and I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Everyone, how are y'all doing? My name's Matt Lewis, the QSP with WGR, and we're going to be talking about the 5 BMP categories today. We're going to keep it kind of simple, try to keep you out of the weeds as much as possible, but let's just jump into it. So this past year was certainly an interesting year with at least 12 record-breaking atmospheric rivers that dumped ungodly amounts of water upon us all. So we also had some economic challenges that I'm sure many of you have experienced, such as supply demand markets, speeding up, speeding down kind of thing, labor shortages. It's seriously hard to find good labor these days. We also dealt with, as I previously mentioned, an abundance of water. We also had a lack of awareness when it came to BMP implementation, a lack of preparedness, but not necessarily an unwillingness from owners, but maybe a lack of follow through when it came to subcontractors, which is something that's pretty common. And we've also had increase in non-compliance fines and higher maintenance costs. All very exciting stuff. So, but the silver lining, if you could find one, is that we have been provided with a few lessons for contractors, municipalities, and inspectors to learn from. Oh, I guess I'm supposed to be doing this, my bad. Okay. All right, so just jumping in to BMPs, we're just going to give you a couple of examples, visual examples. So this one is a clear example of erosion, lack of run-on controls, and lack of sediment controls. Now, just to, let me get forward one more. Okay. This was a site that I inspect where it's almost impossible to really see the vastness of this erosion, but that gulch is a good 50 to 60 feet deep. And this had check dams, erosion controls, sediment controls, like you would not believe. It was really quite good. But the main problem here is there was just a massive amount of sheet flow, or what you might also call run-on, where sometimes it just doesn't matter. Your BMPs can only get you so far when you have 12 atmospheric rivers hitting you back to back. Sometimes you're just going to be in a world of hell. But this site is actually going, the main problem with this site right here is the lack of terracing, because this is a pretty significant hill borderline of a small mountain. So terracing is something that we don't actually talk about. It's not something that I really have highlighted in this, but it's something that terracing is something that I'm convinced should be an active BMP because it helps them slow the flow in ways that check dams and fiber rolls can't. But so just moving on, this is another good example of BMPs that were in place. So they had quote unquote erosion controls, right? They covered it with plastic. They had their linear breaks, but as it says here, too large of a watershed directed onto this cut slope. So the thing with plastic, it's really easy and we like to use it, but it is, there's probably nothing better that speeds up the velocity of water. And when it comes to velocity, that's pretty much our number one enemy when it comes to erosion sediment control. So probably here we would recommend an erosion control mat, a blanket, you know, kind of looks like burlap as opposed to plastic. But yeah, and much of this stuff is probably going to be pretty common sense. So forgive me for beating a dead horse here. Okay. Sediment controls. All right, so as you guys can see here, it's pretty obvious what's happening. The perimeter controls are overwhelmed. That's something that contractors don't really like to mess with when perimeter controls, silt fence, fiber rolls, what have you, sandbags, they get impacted with sediment and they sort of lose their effectiveness. And a lot of the times they just don't want to repair or maintain perimeter controls. But it's a huge thing that we need to constantly implement because as you can see, sediment is overwhelming this perimeter control and making its way into the street gutter. And then you can also see up here, the fiber roll is staked seemingly, but it's not keyed in, and it's also right there's a break. So it's pretty common sense. This is not a good installation, and we have exposed soil. These stockpiles here, you know, close to our perimeter. Usually, we want those covered by the end of every workday if it's inactive, and if possible, the stockpiles be moved back from the perimeter so it doesn't directly threaten it, as it is clearly right here. Oh, also, well, I'll save this. Okay, more of the same there. Just a couple of examples of perimeter controls that have been overwhelmed, and you know, obviously overwhelmed perimeter control. Again, overwhelmed perimeter. And the main thing here is just basically a lack of erosion control. Erosion control basically boils down to sediment cover, just cover of any sort, whether it's mulch, straw, erosion control blanket. But erosion control is really the primary step to preventing major problems on your site. Okay, it's like more of the same. This an absolute disaster. As it says, sediment controls alone are not adequate. They need to be implemented in conjunction with erosion controls and runoff controls. So it's really it's a whole thing. It's, you know, you want to have your entire toolkit working together, and it's almost like a prophylactic, right? It's like it's a preventative is what you're thinking about here when it comes to erosion. You want to prevent erosion by putting a mat down. You want to prevent sediment, the moving of sediment by having properly installed sediment controls like this fiber roll, which is clearly not installed correctly. Okay, this is an interesting one right here. Okay, so we see this all the time. Now, it doesn't look like that big of a deal, but obviously it's not installed correctly because the perimeter controls aren't on the perimeter. Now, a lot of times contractors will have a problem with this because the fencing will already be installed. You know, they look at it as a serious hiccup and they can't figure out how to make that perimeter. It's really just laziness. It's obvious that we need to hit that perimeter. Wherever there's exposed soil, there needs to be controls. Now, this would be okay if the exposed soil on the outside of this fiber roll was all vegetated, right? If they had either not graded it or if it had natural vegetation, then you could probably get away with this sort of chintzy perimeter control that they've installed here. Because again, one of the number one BMPs that we often exclude is just natural vegetation. So if you can leave a buffer of vegetation around your site, if possible, that is an amazing BMP, and it will seriously help you in the future. Again, pretty commonsensical stuff. Okay, so this is a track out. Now, what's interesting about track out, it's probably the most important location on your site because number one, usually state inspectors, they're so overwhelmed. The only way that they're going to stop at your site is based on your track out. If they see track out coming out of your site, they're going to know that something else is messed up. If you're willing to allow the public to see such a disaster of track out onto the main, street, they're like, okay, there's probably a lot more on site. And that's what makes them stop, which I have some pictures of track out coming up. But what's interesting about track out is it's also often the lowest point on site. And so it can lead to a direct, as you can see, impoundment of water in probably the most important location on your site, the entrance and the exit. And so that's something really that's an engineering thing that you kind of want to keep in mind when you're first installing your track out is number one, if it is at the lowest portion of your site, to engineer it so it, can take on some impoundment like this, because it's not uncommon for track outs to be filled up with water, but you can deal with it if you've got chunky rock or if you've engineered it deep enough where you can sort of deal with that, potentially pump it off. But track out is a really important location on site. As you can see, it's just an absolute disaster. And I'm not going to get into the weeds, but now that we're in the 2022 construction general permit, something like this would actually require an additional permit to get that water off site. And not only that, it has to be implemented, if I'm not mistaken, 14 days before it were to happen. So this is probably the most heart causing palpitation thing in the new permit is the notion that we are going to have to get separate dewatering permits when it comes to puddle impoundments. Now, we can go deep into the woods here, but I'll just leave it there. If you have any extra questions about that, we can talk about that individually. But that's something when it comes up, the storm season is coming up. All you contractors out there, you really are going to want to start thinking about this. If you're going to have major impoundments on site, you're going to have a separate dewatering permit. And it's just a pain in the butt. And so just FYI for that. Oh, look at that beautiful track out, all installed beautifully, but it's still tracking out. this happens. You know, sometimes your BMPs, you do everything right, and it's still a mess. But that's where a sweeping program comes into play. Another BMP. You know, it's kind of a pain in the butt, but sometimes you just got to have your guys with the broom at the end of each day. You know, but really, this rock is actually a little too small. You know, usually you want that big, chunky rock. But, you know, sometimes you can only get what you can get, and you just got to kind of deal with it as it comes along. But all in all, this looks pretty good, but it's still, still a bit of a mess. Again, this is for sure going to get you inspected by a state inspector. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Because if you're allowing this to happen on site, oh boy, they're just like, this guy's probably got concrete washout going crazy. He's probably got porta potties tipped over, you know, Lord only knows. But this is the number one way if you got a beautiful street without how track out to keep serious inspectors off your back. Again, we see this, it's very common where essentially just labor subcontractors, they get lazy, right? They find a new entrance and they can't even move the fiber roll out of the way. So this is just, a lot of times when it comes to contractors, you're just running around trying to take care of your subcontractors to try to make them not cost you extra money. So it's one of the joys of being a contractor. Okay, again, more of the same. And of course, this is, right, you see all that sediment in the street gutters. Hypothetically, that's going to end up in your storm system. And God only knows what it's going to do as it just keeps on building up and building up. We've had, for all you municipal inspectors, something to keep in mind, and contractors, if you're allowing sediment to go into your storm system, I have heard of municipalities sending, you know, getting a plumber, send a robot down into the storm system. Oh, turns out you've got a ton of sediment in here. Right, you've allowed, as a contractor, you've allowed a ton of sediment into our storm system, and now you got to get it out. That just means money. So it's good for municipalities to think about that. Oh, these guys they're not listening to us. They're letting all the sediment into the MS4, and then also contractors getting on your subs. Guys, you can't let this happen. You're going to cost me a small fortune, you know, if they happen to check the MS4 prior to, you know, closing out the permit, what have you. More of the same. Just, you know, beautiful display of DI BMPs. You know, I mean, what can you really say about that? You know, like if and that's another thing to, in all seriousness, this is going to happen. You know, especially last year when you have insane amounts of sediment coming off your site, you know, you're going to run into stuff like this. It's going to happen, you know, but get proactive. You know, all that takes is a shovel. 10 minutes, you've reinstalled, and you won't have someone like me freaking out on you when you come across this. And, you know, of course, the fish, you know, direct to the river. So, you know, minor details. This isn't too bad. You can see that the DI has pretty much done its job more or less. I mean, it's still a little rough, but you can see the perimeter controls are pretty decent. There are no erosion controls, so you probably wouldn't have any sediment at all if you had solid erosion controls preventing sedimentation in the first place. But at least that DI, you know, at least they tried on that one. Again, more of the same. You just want to get out there and remove that sediment if you can. Okay, this is interesting. Now, this isn't, you can tell that at least their heart was in the right place, right? But they've pretty much taken probably half of a block's worth of BMPs and put it on one DI, right? Because you should probably take one, maybe two of those bags and every 150 or so feet, you know, put a little check dam. Because I always try to remind people that you have a permit to discharge, right? You have a permit to discharge. You're allowed to discharge. Most people are like, oh, no, don't discharge, right? No, you don't want your water building on site. You want it off your site. But what you're going to try to do is discharge water that's not packed full of sediment. And so this right here, it's definitely going to catch sediment, but it's also going to create a terrible pooling effect, right? And so I'm sure a lot of you contractors and municipal inspectors will go around and see sandbags kicked away from the curb, right? From when the storm has come through. And you're like, well, dude, I'll be like, hey man, your sandbags are screwed up. Like, well, it was puddling. What do you expect? What am I supposed to have a puddle here? You know, and it's like, well, you do want it to get through. You don't want it to puddle up that significantly. You want the water to get through, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a little catch basin with the sandbags, right? Kind of like panning for gold, how when the river comes down and the gold would deposit in a little spin out. It's kind of like the same sort of principle where you want to catch a little basin where it can spin out, the sediment can drop, but the water can still flow out. So that's essentially what you're trying to do. So you're not trying to prevent discharge, you're trying to prevent excess sediment in your discharge. So it's just something to kind of think about. You know, when you are putting your sandbags along your street gutter, you know, every 100 feet or so, you're trying to catch sediment in each one of those, but you're also trying to let the water flow through. So it's a fine line. And, you know, it doesn't always work perfectly. It takes a little bit of trial and error. You know, sometimes it needs 2 bags, sometimes you need 1, sometimes you need to prop the bag up. It depends. Sometimes the street gutter is at an intense slope. You know, sometimes the curb itself is higher than the average curb. But it takes a little bit of trial and error, but that's what you're thinking. You want it to discharge, you just don't want excess sediment in your discharge. All right, erosion controls. Okay, so this, you can clearly see it's coming from the top, and you can see these little rills, these little lines coming down, and it overwhelms the fiber roll onto the sidewalk, into the street gutter. Now, erosion controls are so important because if you had hydro-seeded it, if you had erosion control blanket, something like that, you would probably prevent a lot of that occurrence, that sediment coming off. And this is actually another, even though it's technically erosion control, this is actually a good example of run-on. Not a lot of people understand that run-on can occur from your own site, right? Like say if you have a site in the perimeter controls and you'd think run-on, run-off controls are part of the 5 BMP categories. It's the 5th category. Run-on is you would think, oh, a site next to you is running on. Their water is coming onto your site and impacting your site. And then a run-off is water on your site that's leaving, right? And so a lot of people don't understand the concept of run-on. They only think of it as someone else's site running on, but actually run-on generally happens from your own site. From the higher to the lower is run-on. From a roof to the ground is run-on. Right? So a lot of people don't understand that run-on actually affects, you usually cause your own run-on, and your own run-on causes you your own problems. Because technically this is a lack of erosion control that led to a run-on from the top to the bottom, right? From the top grading to the sidewalk. So again, this is just something to keep in your mind that actually you're more than likely a lot of your problems are going to come from your own run-on. And I'll have another example. This is a beautiful site. You can see there's just no issues anywhere. Has good erosion control, sediment control. The street looks beautiful. It may just be because it washed all the sediment down into the gutters and we can't see it, but we'll just say it's a beautiful operating site. I'm trying to get to, okay, so this is a pretty good, this is probably what a lot of the sites will generally look like. Maybe your sites as well, right? You've got BMPs, a little messy. It's an active site, you know, so just always, you know, when someone like me comes on site, I'll look at this and be like, you know, it's a bit messy. You got a little bit of track out. You got some stuff in the sidewalks, in the street gutters there. But I understand it's an active site, so I'm not going to, you know, break the balls trying to, you know, get all over you for this because you're clearly trying. So that's something you always want to stay proactive. If the inspector comes on site and he sees BMPs, he sees guys that are trying to mess with BMPs, they're not going to nail you with the fine right away. They're going to give you a little bit of time, you know, some correction period. So this is a little bit messy, but they're trying. And so that's always what you want to do. You want to be active. Here is seemingly everything is somewhat going all right. You got your stockpile covered, you got your sediment control, but here's where you have no erosion control and run-on that's likely coming from the roof, impacting next to the house. Oh yeah. Impacting the house, sorry. And creating a little rill that will eventually overwhelm this fiber roll. So really it's, like I said earlier, it's a combination of erosion control and sediment control is really just it's going to save you when it comes to run-on, runoff controls and all other kinds of things. Again, more of the same, good sediment control, but the erosion control, the lack of erosion control is making it so the sediment control is just, it's about to be overwhelmed. This isn't my favorite, but it's okay. I mean, it would be nice if the stockpile was moved back from the perimeter, but you know, I would say more or less that this is properly installed. It's not perfect, but you know, we can't be too psychotic about these things all the time. Okay, this is no bueno. So as you can see, we've had some clear discharge, some runoff, and it looks, I mean, it's really tough to tell from this picture, but you clearly have some sediment in the street gutter. So you would then obviously have to go up gradient and figure out where the breach is. Let's see. This is, again, lack of erosion control. And you can see just how it just erodes the material just so rapidly. I'm trying to find one specific picture. Well, this is similar to the one I'm looking for, but here's runoff control, right? So you've just done all this underground work, right? You've put in all your piping and everything, and you have a storm with erosion controls that are clearly only barely making it. And what happens is run-on from your site fills up all those trenches. Now, perhaps that's not a terrible, thing. Perhaps you weren't filling it with different forms of rock. I doubt it. But this is clearly, if this is a problem, this is going to be a major problem because that's guys with a shovel. There ain't no easy way to get around this. And so run-on can absolutely destroy sites regarding time and efficiency if you have to have guys out there with the freaking shovel and a bucket doing this, you know. Again, imagine if you're doing grading, right? One of the best BMPs I forgot to mention, probably the most important BMP, is literally scheduling, right? It's pretty obvious. Probably don't want to do grading right before the rainy season, but you can see here that run-on from the top has filled up, you know, where all their streets and sidewalks are going to go. God only knows how much that's going to cost them to get the grading crews back out. And then some, because it looks like they have some underground work already installed there. So again, this is a nightmare. This is an absolute nightmare for a contractor. And we saw it happen this year at a number of sites. This is a site that I was trying to find. You can clearly see you've got erosion from the top, which is running on, causing rills, and you can see the sediment spilling out here and filling up that nicely graded area. Again, more of the same. And a lot of this would be prevented from erosion controls, generally a hydro seeding of some sort, which is what all y'all should be thinking about right now. You should be starting to schedule your hydro seeders, or at least getting them on the books sometime around now, because these guys are limited. And once the rainy season comes up, they are just absolutely swamped, because what happens, there's so many procrastinating contractors, right? They're trying to get everything done before they get that, because they don't want to have that hydro seeder come out twice, right? And usually it's like 10% left. And then they don't get the hydro seed in, the storm comes and just absolutely obliterates their site, when maybe they could have just had a 10% obliteration as opposed to, 90% or the full hundreds. So hydro seeding, you guys should really be thinking about that now. And also, there is a difference between just hydraulic mulch and hydro seed. So a lot of time people want grass to grow from the hydro spray, but it's not hydro seed. It's just a sort of hydro mulch. So that's just some food for thought. If you're actually wanting grass to grow, sometimes you actually have to pay that extra expense and get the seed installed into the spray. More of the same. Again, run-on coming likely from the roof, but it looks like we've got some material spills up there, which is just, of course, adding to the misery. Okay, this looks to me like wind erosion, because we have solid BMPs, but we've got sediment on the sidewalk side of the fiber roll that looks to be keyed in properly and installed properly, and you got sediment just filling your sidewalk, which looks like a nice summer day. So how is that possible? More than likely it's wind erosion, which is potentially the #1 erosion that threatens all sites, and probably the #1 thing that most sites don't compensate for is wind erosion. And that is basically, again, coming to erosion controls prevents wind erosion. Obviously, if you have a mat over some exposed soil, it's generally not going to erode away. The main wind erosion comes from stockpiles. So that's why in the new CGP, they're wanting contractors to stabilize stockpiles at the end of each workday. I'm sure will be lovely for all of you. And they don't specify how to stabilize. It's generally, we tend to throw some plastic over it with the fiber roll berm. That's how we generally see stockpiles are stabilized. But luckily, the CGP has given a little bit of leeway on how you are to do that. I will not say how you should actually stabilize your stockpiles, but you can get creative. One of the best ways to stabilize a stockpile is to flatten it out. So, that's the way the CGP is these days. They tell you a lot of things without actually telling you anything. Okay, more wind erosion, run-on, run-off controls. Okay, so run-on controls, again, are going to be coming from the top of this slope down. One of the best ways to prevent run-on is to put a piece of fiber roll on top of the slope. Just the easiest way to prevent it. And to also obviously cover, if you can cover the slope either with a spray or some sort of erosion control mat. It's an expense, but it is beneficial in the end. So here we have, let's see. Okay, so this is what you can see the storms coming in, right? So we have not only exposed everything, but you've created this beautiful straight line for water and sediment to just pick up speed and just send off site. And here you have it. You can clearly see the river sediment, the erosion on the slope, and all this really could have been prevented, #1, with proper scheduling, #2, with erosion controls. And, it's just a nightmare if you don't, take care of this beforehand. Again, more of the same run-on coming down the slope. It looks like a silt fence, but that just looks like an edge. So then you're going to have water coming down and then free falling that small distance, pounding into the ground, creating more erosion. It really is a nightmare. More of the same, much more of the same. If I'm not mistaken, this was supposed to just be a clearing and grubbing. This is always what happens. It's just supposed to be a clearing and grubbing. And then they cut 4 feet down into everything. And, that's okay if you're prepared with your BMPs. Sometimes you just got to handle business and you've got your grading guys and you can do a lot more than you anticipated. And so there's nothing wrong with that. Why not do it? But you just want to be prepared if that sort of thing comes. More of the same. Erosion on the slope, run on. This was that slope. It could have been a lot worse. It's probably just the density of the material prevented, but we would obviously recommend some sort of erosion control matting. Okay, this is interesting. Tons of exposed soil, and the discharge point, if I'm not mistaken, is right around that fence. And this whole site has nothing but kind of impervious ground all around it. So if it does get impacted by sediment-filled water, it's just going to cover the site. It's not going to have any grass. It's not going to have anything to absorb into. So it's a direct threat. This is a direct run-off. Well, it's a run-on from your own site and a run-off threat to your neighbor. And if I'm not mistaken, in this slide, it mentions that the discharge point is right here. And so our company brought this up to the contractor, who ended up more of the same. And what's interesting here is the track walking, right? Track walking is a great BMP, but only if it goes horizontal with the slope, right? Because this is sloping down. So what do you think the water is going to do in these nice, beautiful little, already pre-made rills, right? It's just going to speed up. Everything is going to erode faster versus if it was going this way, the water, right, kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're thinking about when it comes to track walking. More of the same, going downhill completely. Okay, so he actually put in some BMPs, but he didn't have a QSD or QSP. He didn't take any consultation. He just sort of knew, like most of us generally know what fiber rolls are and DI controls and stuff like that. So he installed it, but he didn't stake it down. He didn't key it in, and he obviously didn't put it on his perimeter's edge. He's got the silt fence here, so he's trying, and this is what happened because, right, it's not installed correctly, and this is what happens, right, and just massive erosion. And so it really does matter. It's a pain in the butt to key in these things, to key in a fiber roll. It takes your guys a while. It's not an easy task, and but it really does help. Again, this is just silt fence, same thing. A lot of people don't key in the silt fence. Key in, where you dig a little trench and bury it. It's called keyed in. Same thing. Silt fence, it's incredibly important for silt fence to be keyed in. Again, because we have erosion, lack of erosion controls, you're going to have run on, and you're probably going to have runoff. This is that same site, laying down the fiber roll. It's just not going to do anything. And then not maintaining your silt fence, not keeping it stapled in. This is just common sense stuff, and you can see this is just laziness. Again, just super effective BMP controls. More of the same. Okay, non-stormwater. We're almost there. Non-stormwater, maybe the most confusing but not confusing thing. What is non-stormwater? So we have, let's see, what do we have? This, if I'm not mistaken, was just a water truck. Water trucks come in, spray your site down, add water to whatever. A lot of times they do it right at the track out. They spill water all over the place, and it creates a discharge. So technically I should sample that, and I would be willing to bet, due to just the visual sediment that I can see, that it's going to probably be above 250 MTUs. So that means notice a violation. Okay. Same thing. So non-stormwater would be the truck's water. It would also be irrigation. This is probably the most common form of discharge that I see on site, especially with new developments. Thinking sprinklers always break, always. I'm sure there's one or two men in here who have had a few issues with sprinkler heads in their day. But yeah, so this is a great example of non-storm water discharge. More of the same, more of the same. Oh, I don't even know what kind of hell that is, but it looks like maybe drywall of some sort. I have no idea, but it's obviously there's no perimeter controls, or if there are, that might be buried. I see a stake. So you've got a stockpile with material all over it, non-controlled stockpile, no perimeter controls, no erosion controls. And this is just, I don't even want to know what's inside that water. And here, so this is what a lot of sites look like actually just prior to the storm season, right? You're not necessarily tracking out, but you've got sediment and dust everywhere. So this is maybe not something that you can really do a whole lot about, apart from, putting a broom to it. But so you're just going to want to be really proactive on your DI BMPs, because you're like, okay, my street is filled up with sediment and dust. I'm probably going to discharge some pretty sediment laden water, and you're just going to have to monitor those DIs, during the storm, because you can't really do a whole lot about this level of sediment that's in your street. But this is just very common. Also, I just see, as a side note, I see the trash can in the back. Trash cans can also be forms of discharge. So usually you want to tip your trash can, the front end up just a hair, right? Because if it fills up with water, because they generally don't have lids like they're supposed to, you get that nasty trash water coming out, that's a serious non-stormwater discharge. Technically it's stormwater, but once it mingles with all that other stuff, you know, we can consider it non-stormwater, and it's right there next to the DI. So again, another thing to keep in mind. As you can see, this is drywall material, perhaps concrete. I think it's probably drywall. Again, that's a nightmare for the storm system. And as you can see, that beautiful oily sheen, and you can see sediment in the drain right there in the green pipe. Bam, that right there for municipal inspectors. This is an important thing to watch out. And this is for all you contractors. Again, you don't want this. You don't want this because, you know, they can tag you. Oh, we had to send robots in there. Oh, imagine how much it would cost to clean out sediment from that. Just imagine, because that's, who knows? It's whatever they want to say, because it's such a pain in the butt to do that. So this is really something that I'm always telling contractors to be mindful of, is no one cares about sediment control until you start talking about, hey, dude, your MS4 is probably filled up with sediment, and you better hope to God that they don't send a robot down there because you're screwed. You're like, oh no, oh no. Again, just absolutely terrible. And this turned into an actual fine where they had to have the guys come out and actually pump out the storm system. Again, this is just, oh boy, man, this is crazy. Now, I always get a little bit rude maybe, because I will get on people by saying, look, you guys, I know probably you don't want to listen to me banging on about this, but there's nothing more important than our water and our soil, right? If there's anything that all of us can get behind, barring all politics, right, it's our water and it's our soil, right? And so you should care about this stuff as contractors, as municipal people, you know, because this is going right into our drinking water, right into the fish, into all the rivers, and into the soil, you know. So more of the same. Good housekeeping. Good housekeeping is basically going to be the end all be all. It will prevent everything from happening negatively to you. This is just washout spills. So good housekeeping obviously is providing a washout for your crews. You know, some of the ways that you can get around washout is like if the concrete guy is washing out directly where they're pouring, you know, that's maybe something that I get a lot. Well, you know, the guy, he's washing out his concrete truck where they're going to be pouring a sidewalk in like a week. Like, give me a break, right? Is this really an illicit discharge? The rational side of me says, that's fine, of course. But the compliant side says, nah, man, you need a washout. So, you know, compliance, rationale doesn't always line up as it should, but we try. Again, washouts. See, this is the classic example, right? Laid down the curb and gutter, and then they washed out the truck right where obviously the street is going to go. You know, so and am I really going to give the guy a hard time because they're literally just going to put more concrete or asphalt or whatever right there? But yes, technically, if I want to stay in compliance, if y'all want to stay in compliance, if an inspector comes, right, and sees that washout there on that exposed soil, an OB. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. And usually a washout can be as simple as just a kiddie pool. It can be those huge bins, but it can be as simple as a kiddie pool. It becomes a little bit of a pain to deal with it, to off-haul it, you know? But that's what most concrete washouts consist of these days, is just a kiddie pool. And this is kind of, yeah, the guy's right. He's like washing, can't really tell, but he's just washed his chute out right there. And of course, eventually this is going to be a street, but it's not a street yet. Again, more of the same. Even though this looks like it has erosion control mat, It looks like it has a black erosion control mat over it, I think. So that's, they're trying. And this is the kind of thing where accidents happen. It's an active site. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to spill. It's not the end of the world. But if you have good BMPs, it makes your life a little bit easier. This is not good. Not good BMP. This could trigger a non-visible sample. But if you're on top of it, we always say that you should always have a spill kit and a team on site. The spill kit is essentially a shovel and a bucket, right? And it can go a long way if you can have one or two guys who are dedicated to spilling up any spills, because there are a few clauses in the new permit regarding non-stormwater that if you do mitigate it quickly, if it's not a catastrophic spill, if you do mitigate it quickly, then you are not subject to sampling. So a spill kit and a few guys on site trained, because it's something that also a state inspector will ask, do you have a spill kit and do you have guys trained on site? When we go out and train people, we always make sure that there's a guy on site who's been trained with a spill kit, and he always knows where it is. It's one of those things. Just lack. It looks like maybe here the porta potty potentially tipped over, and they tipped it up real quick and just went about their business. So that's definitely, there's really no cleaning up a porta potty without a non-visible pollutant sample. It's kind of one of those things where if you dump over your porta potty, you're probably going to have to be forced to sample. But if it's something, again, small, quick, a tiny little puddle, and you can mitigate it and you can quickly, it'll save you a lot of headache. Again, probably drywall wall guys are nothing personal, but they're probably the most messy, contaminating crew that you will have on site by far. And they just naturally are messy. It's just part of their game. And it's not a knock against them, but it's always someone you gotta, if you got drywall along the plastic perimeter, you could deal with that. But the drywall on the exposed soil, that can't happen. Again, luckily they have the erosion control mat, good sediment control. So you can see right here, even though this looks a bit like a mess, actually their BMPs are working, right? Because it hasn't left the site. It hasn't seeped into the exposed soil. So this is actually an example, in my opinion, of good BMPs with a bad situation. Bad situation, no erosion controls, no care for anything apart from getting home on time. Yeah, and this is always nice too when you find these like out in the middle of the field, so be wary of that as inspectors, contractors, whatnot. Sometimes your guys will get a little tricky and try to plop that, material spill out in the middle of a field where you won't see it. But us inspectors know where to look. We always find it. Again, here you can see the fiber roll. Is this a fiber roll? Might even just be a pipe. Might be a pipe, okay. But yeah, material spill, all bad. Jeez, please. What can you say? What can you say? Okay. All right, I'm being told to speed it up because I talk too much. Get to trash, of course. Come on. BMP. Let's put it in the trash can, put a lid on it, because this is going to create all kinds of hell. Just more of the same. Good housekeeping is not always BMPs that we think. It's usually trash. A lot of times good housekeeping is just controlled trash, and it just is an unsightly mess. So this slide has way more slides than my presentation, but again, it's just, and just the last Hall of Fame for fun. What they call this, the nonconformist. So again, the fiber roll should be side by side, not stacked on top of each other, creating that little This is the escape artist. Right? I don't know. He's getting, I don't know what. The tree hugger, the tree hugger. So this is the new eco-friendly version of tree huggers. This one's hard to tell, but it was like the broiled, all this caught on fire. So if your fiber roll catches on fire, you should probably replace it. And last but not least, the up and comer. So sometimes this job bums me out, and then I come on social locations like this, and I just get a little bit of excitement and happiness. So that's it. Yeah.